Join me today as we do a top 10 list of Star Wars novels. This is the Geek Cabal channel. My name is Bobbie, and today we're going to be doing a top 10 list of Star Wars novels. And going to be experimenting with something a little different on the recording, see how the audio turns out here. So, so here we go. These are all books from the old expanded universe, just to be clear. And for any of them that I can find links to them on Amazon, there'll be affiliate links down in the description and probably a pinned comment. So, it was actually kind of hard to choose 10, and I definitely cheated on a couple of them and said, like, this set, this storyline, what have you. Yeah, definitely did that in like 3 of these, so yeah, it's not strictly 10 novels here. I want to do the honorable mention first, which goes to Shadows of the Empire. Also should be noted that Shadows of the Empire was considered canon under Lucas, and it had like the full push. It had the book, the video game, a soundtrack CD was made, action figures, everything. I'm actually kind of amazed we haven't had Lego sets from it just yet. Also, I think we haven't yet actually seen Black Series figures from it yet either, although I know there is a Shizor figure on the way. He's the Prince of the Black Sun, the first Prince of the Black Sun crime organization. So Shadows of the Empire takes place between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And it sees our characters trying to, so we also read it, I believe they're trying to figure out where Han went, because Boba Fett has him, and they also have to infiltrate Coruscant for something. Again, it's been a while. We're introduced to the character of Dash Rendar, who is with the rebels ostensibly, and then like I said, Shizor, who heads the Black Sun criminal organization, and he has aspirations to, I think, supplant Vader as the Emperor's right-hand man, which means he doesn't completely understand the relationship between the two of them to know that he has like no real chance at this. And this is also, I believe this is the first place where Vader's castle is referenced, and that doesn't spell out that it's on Mustafar, because this book came out way before there was a Mustafar. So, yeah, overall, it's a good story. Trying to remember if there's any major differences between the video game versions, or the comic book, or the novels. I think they all stick with a similar ending. But yeah, it's pretty good. However, these others I believe were better. Number 10, the novelization of The Force Unleashed 1 and 2. Although I think 1 was the better one, but you may as well have them both so you have the whole story. These books are far better than any novelization of a video game has any right to be. They present a much better storyline, a much more fleshed out storyline, much more better realized storyline than the games. The games are great. Well, the first one's great. I haven't actually finished the second one. I bought it, played it for 4 hours, and looking online to see where I was stuck, there's maybe an hour's worth of the game left. I've never picked it back up since, and I bought it like when it came out. So that was several years ago. These books follow Vader's apprentice, who's played by a Star Killer, who's played by Sam Witwer, who does both the motion capture and the voice work. And later on, he would go on to do Darth Maul's voice in Clone Wars and Rebels. I think he did Maul's voice for Maul's brief cameo at the end of Solo as well. So these, like I said, these books follow the game, but they really flesh things out quite a bit more. There's major like philosophical things about the Force in these novels. The big one being trying to explain, like, Star Killer comes across as like ridiculously powerful, and now that's it's a video game, but the novels flesh that out, where I can't remember who he's talking to, but one of the characters is trying to explain to him the concept that the Force is limitless. The Force does not limit people. People limit the Force. It's all in perception and in your mind. So if you can truly move beyond thinking that there's limits, this is kind of similar to what Yoda was trying to explain to Luke. Whenever Luke was like, when he's trying to lift the X-Wing, he's like, it's just too big. And Yoda's like, it's the same as lifting that rock. Size doesn't matter. The only limit is up here, or kind of like with Neo in the Matrix. All the other characters are, in some way or another, they're still stuck. They're still living in that world that has limits. And Neo is the one who can see beyond that, to see that if you can see beyond that, there are no limits. And so, yeah, so he's quite powerful as a result. Number 9, Darth Maul, Shadowhunter. This series is actually a sequel to a comic book series by Dark Horse. There was a prequel about Darth Maul, and this takes place, this ends just before the Phantom Menace begins. And the gist of this one is that there's an insider from within the Trade Federation that knows that Palpatine is Sidious and is intending on spilling the beans. So, in the comic, he goes after this guy who seeks refuge within the Black Sun criminal organization, and Sidious tells him to wipe them out. So he demolishes them. He has to fight a Night Sister who is the bodyguard of the main First Prince at that point. This is years before Shadows of the Empire, so it's not Shizor. And he goes right through her and then kills the First Prince. But the guy, I believe the guy escapes, and so then this one is about him finishing the hunt for that guy. And I want to say someone else eventually gets the information. It's him hunting them down. And I believe it's Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are the ones on Coruscant who are tracking him, but he's not leaving any evidence behind that it's a Sith. And it's a Darth Maul centric storyline, and there aren't a lot of those. So I thought it was good. Number 8, Death Star. Now, this book does somewhat play into the criticisms of the old EU, which had to deal with lack of continuity. Because by the time this came out, I want to say this was the 3rd version of events of how the Rebels gained the plans to the Death Star. But what's unique about this is from the perspective of people on board the Death Star. Because if you've seen the movie Clerks, you know that as they talk about in there's all kinds of people on board that aren't part of the Imperial Army. The first Death Star, they said, yeah, that's totally manned by the Imperial Army. It was the second one, but this kind of goes the other way. So this is saying that, well, on board the Death Star, there would be members of the Imperial Army and everything, but there would be like restaurants and bars and libraries and all kinds of things that would just in stores, because it's a moon-sized battle station with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of soldiers on board and technical personnel. If you watch Star Trek Deep Space Nine, you know that a station has to have amenities. And so this follows a lot of the people from, the various parts, and takes advantage of the fact that it's pretty late in the publishing era. So it's got a lot to draw upon. Like, it tries to explain why the gunner at the end of A New Hope doesn't just immediately blast Yavin once he comes around, because he's sitting there like, stand by. Well, there's a reason, and it's here in the book. It's a bit contrived, but it's here. Also tries to make more out of Admiral Mati's character. For those who don't know that name, he's the guy who decided to tell Vader to his face that his religion was a bunch of baloney, and then Vader got to demonstrate that no, he's a powerful cleric, and you really shouldn't have done that. So, and also you also get some internal Tarkin dialogue. Like, you get his thoughts because he's watching the fight between Vader and Obi-Wan whenever Obi-Wan just disintegrates. And there's a little interplay between Vader and Tarkin there. So there's a lot of background stuff. You get just a little bit of Basil Amelisk, who in the old EU was the guy who designed the Death Star. And one of the people is trying to warn him about the exhaust port. And he just blows them off, which in a different novel that I don't have listed here, you find out he pays for that extremely with the Emperor. I believe it's Darksaber. The Emperor apparently had him killed, cloned him. Well, sorry, not in that order. Cloned him first, had the clone watch the original die, and of course the clone has all their memories, and then repeated that cycle several times before he was convinced that Basil had suffered enough. So that's why the second Death Star did not have that fault. But yeah, it's a really good book if you want to see things from the perspective of other people on board the Death Star. And also, it's going to be different from Rogue One, obviously, because Rogue One didn't try to take it into account. All right, so number 7, Outbound Flight. This is a prequel of sorts to the Thrawn Trilogy. This is canonically where Thrawn's first appearance would be if you were to lay everything out in publishing order. Or not in publishing order, in the order that the stories take place. Because this is well before the Thrawn Trilogy. This is during the prequel era, in fact. The Outbound Flight is a ship that the Jedi are going to send to go explore another galaxy. And the main Jedi Master in charge is Jerus Sabaoth, who I'm convinced I'm still mispronouncing his name. Excuse me. But, no one's corrected me so far, so here we go. And it involves them, along with some criminals who are on the run, who just blind jump, and you find out why that's a bad idea. They don't suffer those consequences, but they elaborate on what they could be, as well as some of Palpatine's machinations, and all this shows up with Thrawn, and you find out his real name, which is like Mithrandow or something. I couldn't hope to pronounce it, but this is where he learns of the Empire. His people, the Chiss, do not believe in preemptive strikes and things like that, whereas he does, but he can't, by their military doctrine, actually execute them. But he sees with the Empire that they are more than willing to do that kind of thing. So it's the beginning of his interest in the Empire. And there's a part in the Thrawn Trilogy where he mentions they come across a clone of Jerus Sabaoth. Jerus, it's got a second U, Sabaoth. And he's telling, I think it's Palelian, he's like, so how do you know who that guy is? He's like, oh, how do you know he's a clone? He's like, well, I killed the original. And well, Outbound Flight's where that happens. But it's a good book. If you want to see some prequel trilogy Jedi, you want to see how a Jedi can fall into darkness and madness, things like that. And it's a good intro to Thrawn. So, yeah. Good book. Check it out. I believe Timothy Zahn wrote that one also. Number 6, the Rogue and Wraith Squadron books. It's hard to single one of them out. They're more or less similar quality. Same writers, a writer. I don't think it was a series of writers, but the Rogue Squadron is the Rebel Alliance. That's the flight group that is composed initially of the survivors of the Battle of Yavin 4. So Luke, Wedge, and a few others. And then as the storyline progresses, eventually, Luke phases out because he's going to become a Jedi, and Wedge becomes the main guy. And so they're like the elite rebel pilots. And this is all like post Return of the Jedi, showing the lengths the New Republic had to go through to actually deal with the remnants of the Empire. And this is a whole lot of guys on the ground, very minimal Jedi stuff. I think Corran Horn is the Jedi that shows up. It's Corran Horn or Kyle Katarn, I can't even remember which. But they come into their own a lot, through several books before the whole Jedi part pops up. And then Wraith Squadron, this is like the Dirty Dozen in the Star Wars universe, except they're not criminals. They're like kind of like the washouts that they all put together for basically that they have potential, but like this is their last chance. And so those books I thought were a little more fun than the Rogue Squadron books, because they come up with some very unorthodox tactics and some very colorful characters throughout. So those are both good, but it's several books in the series. Number 5, the Darth Bane Trilogy. These are about the gentleman who founded the Rule of Two for the Sith, Darth Bane. And it starts off, the trilogy starts with him as I think he's a miner somewhere, and gets drafted into the Sith army, shows potential in the Force, so they start training him, and it progresses from there till he is the last one standing, and he takes an apprentice. And then it progresses from there to see how he develops the Rule of Two, how ultimately he tries to cheat the Rule of Two because he thinks he's found a way to immortality. And some references to Revan and a lot of like Knights of the Old Republic, Knights of the Old Republic, as well as Tales of the Jedi, that kind of stuff in the background. It's written by the guy, I don't know his name off the top of my head, but he was the main writer for Knights of the Old Republic 1. He also did another book, Revan, which I feel significantly differently about, which is why it's not on this list. But yeah, they're all good books, and you want to see like the foundation of the modern as of Palpatine, the modern Sith Order and its ideals, where it came from, and what drove him to do it the way he did it. But it also explains like the grand plan, which is something that the current Disney movies have never actually explained, and it's very critical to realizing why the Jedi didn't stop them sooner. Number 4, Shatterpoint. This one is all about Mace Windu during the Clone Wars. He goes back to his home planet, which is basically like it's a death world, and it's like Vietnam in the Clone Wars essentially, or like Heart of Darkness. Has to go up against a Jedi who's gone rogue because she's seen too much of the horrors of war and thinks that the only way to win is to expose others to the horrors, and just a lot of things like that. You find out about Mace Windu's Shatterpoint ability, how he can essentially like see lines of effect and causality and see where they center on individuals and objects and everything, so he knows like what's actually important on the battlefield. And like at one moment he talks about Palpatine, how he's just like staring into the sun because of all the things that combine into him. But that's to be expected because he's the Chancellor. And I think he even has like some doubt, like, well, some of this stuff doesn't look great, but he can't pick it all apart. So but it's really good, and in my opinion, it's a book that should be adapted into a movie. Set it during the Clone Wars. If it's got to be animated, so be it, but live action would be really cool. There is a sequel of sorts to this, The Shadow over Mimbar. I'm probably remembering that name wrong. That book wasn't quite as good. One of the only books to feature the TIE Defender, and but like some of the characters definitely are from this book, even though like the storylines aren't really connected. So, and that book was okay, but it's not top 10 worthy. Number 3, The Rise of Darth Vader. This is the book that's meant to show us how we go from Anakin as we know him at the end of Revenge of the Sith to Darth Vader as we know him as, Darth Vader. And I think it does a pretty good job. It opens with Anakin, he's now, Vaderized, and he's pursuing some Jedi, and gets his ass handed to him. And there's a moment where he's sitting there with Palpatine, and he's in the hyperbaric chamber, so he's got the helmet off, and basically sitting there going on and on. He's like, oh, you could have made this out of like the same metal that you make the Star Destroyers out of, and you could have done this, and you could have done this. And Palpatine's fine. Is like, are you done yet? He's like, what? He's like, are you done whining? Like, you failed. This is on you. And he's like, why are you complaining so much? He's like, in case you didn't notice, we won. We control the galaxy. And Vader's just like, yeah, and look at us. We're both horribly disfigured. And so Palpatine's like, well, didn't your master didn't Yoda always go on about, we're not this crude matter, luminous beings are we? And the conversation kind of keeps going. And then finally, Vader's like, you're the reason Padme's dead. And the Emperor, internally is like, well, I knew this was coming at some point. And he's like, whoa there, buddy. I'm not the one that force choked her to death. That was all on you. And so he kind of is mope-assing around, and the Emperor realizes that if he's going to be any use to him, he needs to spark his hatred and his anger, even if he has to have it focused on him. The whole like rule of two thing, remind him like, hey, at some point, buddy, you've got to try to overthrow me. And if this is, you're never going to make the grade if you're like this. So as the book progresses, you see Vader emerge as he just, becomes the ruthless murder machine that we know later on. Like by the time he gets to Kashyyyk to try to put down the rebellion, he's the one who's just like, bomb the planet, from orbit. Anything that survives, we'll enslave them and use them to build the Death Star. And it's just one of those like, wow, okay. And then there's a little bit towards the end with Alderaan and Senator Organa and all that, but it's a really good book. In my opinion, also movie worthy. This would definitely be like if Disney had Brain One in their head and was going to actually make a Vader project, they should just take this book and adapt it. But that's just me. Number 2, Darth Plagueis. This is pretty much the only insight we get into Plagueis. And it's just overall, it's an excellent book. You see initially him with his master, Tenebris. And you should definitely, if you read this book, there's an article you might be able to find online from Star Wars Insider that fully explains what happens to Tenebris. But then you get to find out, about Plagueis, who he is as a man, as a Sith, how he finds Palpatine, how Palpatine wasn't discovered by the Jedi, because he obviously has a high midichlorian count, and how he helps shape Palpatine into who he is. You get some inside track with Maul, who's questioning everything because he's realizing, like, if these two die, I can't continue the plan. I don't even know what the plan is. I don't have the connections or anything. He's really beginning to suspect that he's just a disposable assassin. And you got a lot of things like that, and it builds up to how Palpatine finally takes him out and when. Which I'll just minor spoilers. We've talked about it before. It's actually during the Phantom Menace. So, yeah, excellent book. Also a lot of insights into the Sith and some of the more subtle things they do to try to shift the balance to the dark side, and not so subtle things. It's just that no one understands what they're doing. So, except for them. But yeah, pretty good book. Definitely worth checking out. So, number 1, as if there's ever really going to be any doubt here, it's the Thrawn Trilogy. These were definitely like, while there were other EU books before them, they were the ones that elevated the EU to what it could be. Zahn is an excellent author. Now, there's a few things that don't 100% line up with how the Clone Wars ended up being depicted, because Zahn had nothing to go on. And that's why George Lucas didn't want anything written about that period, because he knew he was ultimately going to develop movies and didn't want to be beholden to anyone else and didn't want to screw up anyone else's ideas. So, even in the broad strokes, a few things are a little iffy, but it would take the most minor of rewrites to fix that. But this is where, like, the pinnacle non-movie Star Wars villain shows up, Grand Admiral Thrawn. And this is where you get to see why he is the threat that he is. The man uses 4 Star Destroyers to bring the Republic to its knees, because he's able to outthink them on every level. And, they explain, like, there's a reason why the Imperial Grand Admirals are dangerous. And this is why, because they are strategic masterminds. They know how to organize. Any one of them could have stepped in and taken the Emperor's place and held everything together if they would have had the chance. So, yeah. And it introduces us to Palelian, who, and I'm possibly mispronouncing his name, he's Thrawn's second in command, and he goes on to be in several books and eventually leads the Imperial Remnant. He's actually shown up in, I think he was in Ahsoka, so he has had a live action appearance now. And so we get to see that. We get to see, some of the fallout of everything, the galaxy learning that Vader was Leia's father, for instance, and I think they know that he was Luke's father. And you get to see, Luke having to deal with Mara Jade, who's another fan favorite character who I'd really love to see actually introduced into live action if Disney wouldn't screw her up. Who she was programmed by the Emperor to kill Luke. She was known as the Emperor's Hand. And it's like a subliminal thing built into her mind that she's got to overcome, because she doesn't have anything against Luke, but it's a thing that's there. And there's a nifty workaround that allows her to deal with that at the end. And then, like I said, there's the clone Jerus Sabaoth. In the end game, we also have a clone of Luke. Luke, he's got 2 U's, made from his hand from Bespin, and with that lightsaber. It introduces I believe that it's pronounced Ysalamari or Ysalamari. They're lizard creatures that create like an anti-force bubble, which is how Thrawn is able to plan and everything without the Force users figuring out what he's doing. But it's an excellent trilogy, very Star Warsy. Thrawn's plan is a pretty good plan, and and the way he's undone is a way that he wouldn't have seen coming, so like it fits that, even his tactical genius didn't foresee what happens, and it's believable that he wouldn't foresee it. That's the important part, because normally whenever you write genius characters and they go down somehow, usually you're like, yeah, but I mean, come on, they're smarter than that. No, this was very well done. It was very artfully done. You'll know what I mean if you read the book. So, yeah, you want to check out some good Star Wars books? Definitely worth checking out. Hopefully Owen will be done reading the Thrawn Trilogy at some point in the near future, and we can talk about it a little bit more on here. If there's any of these you want me to go into greater depth on, let me know down in the comments. I will try to. It has been a while since I've read most of these. I'll definitely try to go back and take some cliff notes or something. Or if there's any other Star Wars books from the old EU, because I've read a lot of them. I'm not going to claim I've read all of them, but I definitely read a lot of them. So, and I consider these the best. There are others I mentioned in here that are good, but these are all worth checking out. Like I said, I'm going to try to post some links down in the description to any of them that are on Amazon. There'll be affiliate links if you buy them. We get a kickback of sorts, helps the channel. But I'm sure you can probably find them elsewhere if you're really that interested in them. Like Half Price Books probably has a lot of them, if I had to guess. But anyway, that's about all I've got to say on that. So, like I said, let me know down in the comments if you've read any of them, liked them, disliked them, what have you. But, like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. That's what really helps. Sharing and commenting is what helps us grow the channel, which we always appreciate. But other than that, just remember, the Force will be with you always.